Welcome to Money Matters. I am Emily Johnson, Certified Financial Planner and Managing Director of Polaris Capital Advisors, and I am joined, as always, by the one and only DCrowell of Mortgage Network, and we are here to discuss all things where your money matters. And we were debating about what to focus on this week because the markets have been somewhat sideways, not that interesting. We have had some interesting earnings reports, I guess, primarily in the retail side, which is not particularly good. So if we're looking at the markets as an indicator of what's going on in sort of Main Street, we're definitely seeing that everybody's rushing to Amazon and not so much to Sears anymore. So that's, if you're interested in sort of the real estate side of that, or looking at each of the sectors, that's sort of been an interesting story that's sort of indicative of what's been going on Main Street. Other than that, though, we've definitely had sort of a continued sideways slash positive slash not that exciting market where we have a VIX, and as we've talked about in shows past, the so-called fear indicator really, really, really low, and it is staying right there, and that's sort of been the story. So that and a little bit of political news, I guess, and also the fact that we're seeing low interest rates. So I don't know if you want to dig into that.
Yes, I think the most astonishing thing is stable sideways market, low fear index, interest rates. The 10-year Treasury is at 2.35 this morning, which is bouncing on a very low number. We once upon a time got down to about 1.86, 1.87, but 2.35 is still very low. It puts long-term interest rates at about 4% or 4.125% on the street, the money that you borrow from people like me. But I think the most astonishing thing about all of these really quite stable, quite normal numbers is that we have more than a little political action going. We have absolute chaos. We have a first presidential term which no matter what your politics, no matter whether you're right or you're left or you're center, can only be described as adrift. There is no policy of any significance that's coming out of this White House for a very, very long time.
That doesn't sound very neutral.
That's
not even remotely neutral.
That's absolutely neutral.
That's not even remotely neutral.
But what I mean by that is something that's more significant to the financial markets, which is what we're concentrating on, and that is, I believe that what we're seeing, and I'm seeing the writings of more and more economists that say that there's a very real disconnect occurring between the major financial markets and the major corporations and the movement of markets from the political elites. The political elites and the political process is not affecting the economy at large nearly to the extent that it once did. The economy is very much showing its independence. It's hard to manipulate the economy. There are many, many checks and balances in place. A policymaker can talk about strengthening trade deals or weakening trade deals, but really and truly, the market is enormous and is going to decide how that's played. You know, the economic forces are immense. You can call that lobbying, and you can call it a negative effect on our government, or you can call it a necessary check and balance. But the fact of the matter is, nothing terribly radical is going to take place. At least that's what the predictors in the financial markets are saying. When you see a market where there's very little fear factor, it's a stable market.
But this is also a market that's run up quite a bit since this last election. So I think the assumption was that we actually were going to see a lot of things happen. We haven't seen that backpedal at all. So we run up based on an assumption, which is the way the market's always, the way it always works. And now we're sitting sideways saying, okay, is it going to happen? Is it not going to happen? But you're not seeing any backpedaling. Nobody's taking the cash out of the market saying...
But you're not seeing the backpedaling, which is very interesting. Right. The chances of a massive tax cut, which would be highly stimulative, which according to Mr. Trump, who invented the expression "prime the pump," which it's pretty amazing since I've been using the expression all my life.
But you didn't invent the internet like Al Gore did.
No, that's
so,
true.
Yeah.
That's true. So, but the point is that a massively stimulative tax cut, unlikely to occur. We've got an economy that's buzzing along. There are checks and balances. The Fed will have its say. Everybody's going to have its say.
Well, you never. I mean, you never know what the impetus
happen.
could be. I mean, there could certainly be something that would make it in the Democrats' best interest to go ahead and go along with that. Who knows what that might be? It could be these midterm elections that might end up doing something different. I mean, there will be either there'll be no stimulus and there'll be no impetus for any change in direction, and we'll continue to see this sideways market that is continuously favored too by demographics because people don't want to move money out of the equity markets or out of the bond markets because there ain't nowhere else to get any yield.
Correct.
So the cash is not going anywhere for that reason, and we could continue sideways, or there will be some impetus. We just never know what that's going to be. If you could foresee that, then we would all have our crystal ball and make we'd be done.
Exactly. What impresses me is that given the vitality, let's put it that way, so that I stay
neutral.
So that I stay neutral. Given the vitality of the political discussion, given the vigor of the political discussion that's ongoing, it's very interesting that given that intensity, that the financial markets are drifting along really quite independent of the discussion. I mean, in many of our shows past, if the Chancellor of Germany gets the flu, it affects the financial markets greatly. Right. If there's a hint that the French elections might go this way or that way, it affects the financial markets greatly. You remember when we were running up to Brexit with England leaving the common market, there was an enormous impact. Right now, you have arguably something close to a constitutional crisis, close to in the U.S. government, the most powerful economy in the world, and the markets are just trugging along.
Well, there's nowhere else to go.
And that's what I'm fishing for. I'm not fishing for a political debate. I'm fishing for an explanation of that.
Well, it's the same with European markets. I mean, the European markets have performed really well in spite of all of the chaos, the ups, the downs, the massive unemployment in several of the member countries. It's done very, very well. If you just have a basic developed Europe index fund, you've done pretty well. So it's not sexy, but they have defied the odds, mostly because there's still nowhere else to put those funds. So your money is still going somewhere to, in an attempt to generate a yield, and that's where it's going. I'd be interested to see what happens if we do even get anywhere close, regardless of the tax reform, to repatriation of funds. Because if that happens, especially in your neck of the woods, that would be really interesting, because having all that money flow back into the United States, most likely it would end up back in the bond market more so than the equity, although I'm sure some would be in the equity market, but largely into the bond market, and it would move the equities market as well, but that would keep our rates very, very low, which in theory could be stimulative, but I mean, we've had it for so long, maybe it won't.
It's fascinating.
But that would also, if you hold bonds, it's a pretty, I've continued to hold some of our individual bond positions because of that, because they're not bad, rates aren't moving up just yet, and even though we had been afraid of bonds before, and loss of principal should the interest rates spike at some point, if we see a repatriation of funds, the bonds are going to spike. So
yeah, the bonds are going to spike and the rates will go down again. In the second segment, we can talk about the effect of all of this on local real estate, because that's one of the principal drivers of the local economy. The other thing we can talk about is the effect of all of this, effect or non-effect of all of this on tourism, which is the other great driver of the local economy here.
Well, and then we could also talk about how it also impacts those that are living off of their portfolios, which is another driver of.
and the third great driver, incoming and already here, is how does this impact retirees, their willingness to retire, how much they bring with them, what they buy when they get here, and then how do they manage their finances once they get here.
Right.
So these are, whenever you look at the big political issues, there are 3 or 4 local issues that are very interesting that don't involve shrimping or crabbing or whatever that
or
are
tennis or golf.
Or tennis or golf, that are really kind of micro versions of major issues that are really worth looking at. And we'll do that when we come back.
Please stick with us. We'll be right back with more Money Matters.